Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of Wargaming Warlords, the brand new division started by yours truly, Big Dan. So today all that we're going to do is just start off nice and simple. You can probably skip this episode if you already do 40k, because all I'm going to do for this one is just a quick run through for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, might be curious of just how the rules work, and just a quick demo game to show just how these rules work in action. So this is what the board looks like. Now this is actually two boards put together. Now normally if it's only what's known as a 25 power game, usually you'd only use one of these boards. Because one of the armies I'm using is so large, I've decided to add two boards together. So how it works is you have things like these, which are pieces of cover. When a unit is within a piece of cover, you can add one to its armour save, and I'll explain what that is in a minute. And generally the rule is when you go to a Games Workshop to play against someone, anything that's not on the side of the board is either dead, or you can place it in something called Deep Strike, and where Deep Strike is where they are basically reinforcements that aren't placed on the battlefield at the start during deployment, and I'll get into what deployment is right now. Before we get into that, there's a thing that you probably need to know about called a data sheet. So this is for every single unit that you can use in 40k has a data sheet. So it tells you all the information you need to know about what this model is like on the battlefield. So for example here we'll have a Space Marine, Librarian and Terminator armour. So it tells you the name, the power cost for when you're writing an army list, which I'll explain, and the number that there is, and there's movement, which is how far in inches the model can move in the movement phase. There's weapon skill and ballistic skill. Weapon skill is what it hits on a dice in close combat. Ballistic skill is a ranged attack. Strength and toughness, which is how physically strong and tough model is. There's wounds, which is how much damage it can take before it's killed. There's attacks, which is the number of attacks it has in close combat. Leadership, which relates to morale and other things, and armour save, which is what you need to roll on the dice if the wound roll passes to keep the model safe. Then underneath it tells you all the weapons data sheets, war gear options, so if you can swap out anything, the abilities, and some models are known as what's called psychers, which basically means they can cast and deny psychic powers in the psychic phase. So for example, for this Terminator Librarian, he can cast 2 and deny 1. I'll explain how this works when we get to it. But basically the general structure of the game is that you have the command phase where you gain something called a command point, which I'll explain soon. There's the movement phase where you move models. There's the psychic phase where if either of you have any psychers, you cast psychic powers. Shooting phase where you fire ranged weapons, which you probably guessed. The charge phase where you charge into close combat. And there's the morale phase where you check are models scared and run away. Yeah, but we'll get into that soon. So first off, there's deployment. So how this generally works is you roll a dice for different missions, And the missions in the 40k rulebook, which looks something like this, just tells you what the deployment zones are. They can be all sorts of different things, but because this game's just a simple one, I'm just going to make it one where the only objective is just for the armies to try taking each other out. Because sometimes you have games where you do stuff like claim objectives or target certain enemy units and whatnot, but that's important for another time. So how you structure an army in Warhammer 40k is you have to have something called a Warlord. So for me, it is this fella here, called a Chapter Master, where what happens is the Warlord gains something called a Warlord trait, or you might be assigned one if it specifies. He has a certain ability that's listed. Sometimes you have to roll the dice to find out what it is, and that's what he's able to do for the rest of the game, but it doesn't carry over into later games. You roll again in the future games. It's just for this one. So I'll explain how deployment works here. So for this one, what I'm going to do is to keep it nice and simple, because this is just a tutorial after all, is I'm going to say the deployment zones are 10 inches from the centre of the board is the limit of your deployment zone, so here onwards. So normally what happens is, how deployment works is models are divided into units. So for example, these 5 Space Marines here are a unit, that bike is a unit, this Librarian's a unit, and the Captain's a unit by himself. But what I'm going to do here is, usually what happens is, you roll the dice, and whoever rolls highest between the two of you gets to deploy a unit first, then your opponent deploys a unit, then you deploy another one, and so on and so on. My tip for when you're deploying is try to counter where your enemies place their models. So for example, let's say they placed a tank over there, maybe place a tank over here, or if not a tank, just something with an anti-vehicle weapon on it. Because it's just me though, I'm just going to roll this dice. So on a 1 to 3, Tyranids deploy first, for their unit first, and on a 4 to 6, I'll deploy a Space Marine unit first. So we get a 5. So that means a Space Marine unit is deployed. So I'll show you how we do this. So as you can see, I've measured 10 inches from the centre of the board to be the edge of my deployment zone. So the edge of my deployment zone is pretty much this point on the piece of terrain up there. So I'm going to deploy a Space Marine unit in there. Space Marines normally have an armour save of 3+, which basically means you need to, if they were attacked by a weapon that doesn't have an AP, which I'll explain momentarily, they would need to roll a 3 or higher to prevent themselves losing any wounds. But because they're in cover, if they were attacked by a ranged weapon without any AP, they would instead have a 2-up armour save, because, like I said, cover increases your armour save by 1. So as you can see, I've been continuing to deploy both Space Marines and Tyranids back and forth. As I said earlier, there's a thing called Deep Strike. So for example, I could put this Librarian in Deep Strike because it has on his abilities list a thing here called Teleport Strike. Now if you check earlier in the Codex, what it says is, this model can be placed in Deep Strike and be brought in the reinforcements phase of any of your movement phases, as long as it is 9 inches away from any enemy models. So let's say I did put him in Deep Strike and I wanted him to bring him in at the end of my first movement phase. I'd use this tape measure and I'd measure 9 inches away from every enemy unit, and then that would be where he's allowed to deploy anywhere on the board as long as it's 9 inches away, and once I've moved all of my other models that I want to for the movement phase. So I have moved everything forward. Now there is a thing that you can do while moving called advancing, where basically it allows a model or with its unit to move further than the movement characteristic allows. So what you do is you roll a dice and then you add that, and that's how much further after moving them they can go up to. So 5, let's say I wanted to move those Assault Marines, so basically that means they can go a further 5 inches, but I wouldn't recommend it unless you need to, because if you advance you can't charge on this turn unless the unit has an ability that says otherwise, and the only ranged weapon that you can fire is one known as Assault, but even then you're still -1 to hit. So, like I said, I wouldn't recommend it. Sorry, I forgot to mention, the first thing you do before all your movement is something called command phase, where if a model has an ability where it says you can do so and so during the command phase, then that's the time to do it. But if not, which I know a lot of models don't have commands, all that happens is you gain a command point, which is why my command point dice is now at 4 instead of 3. So after movement you have the psychic phase, so that librarian is within range of that unit of Gene Stealers to cast something called Smite. So Smite has an 18-inch range. It has a warp charge value of 5. What that means is you roll 2 dice and then add them together, and you need to get a 5 or higher for Smite, which is what its warp charge value is. And the Broodlord is also a Psyker, so he can deny 1 psychic power per turn because that is what is specified in his Codex supplement. So let's say Smite, so I need a 5 or higher, and I get a 10, so I'm just short of what's known as a Super Smite. So what a Super Smite is where when doing a Smite, if you roll an 11 or 12, then instead of doing D3 mortal wounds, which are basically damage that can't be stopped, then you instead do D6 mortal wounds, which basically just means you roll a dice and that's how many wounds are dealt to the unit. So I'm going to say that he's going to try to stop it. So this is something called denying the witch. He can do it once per turn because that's what's specified on his data sheet, as I've mentioned. So you need to roll higher than the total that your opponent rolls, so obviously an 11 higher in this case, which he doesn't make, so Smite isn't denied, and that was his 1 deny on this turn. So I do D3 mortal wounds to that unit of Gene Stealers. So basically that means I roll this dice and half it, and that's how many Gene Stealers are gone, because they only have 1 wound each. 6, so that means 3 Gene Stealers are dead. Next, he's going to cast a psychic power known as a Psychic Scourge. This is one where it has a warp charge value of 6, so it's cast. He can't deny it because he's just spent his 1 deny per turn, and he's the only striker for the Tyranids. So how this one works is you roll a dice and add the leadership of the person casting it, so the librarian in this case, and then you roll dice of the target unit and add their leadership, so the Gene Stealers. So the librarian has a leadership of 10, so 10 plus 5, so that's 15. So what happens is the Gene Stealers have a 9 for their leadership. So what happens is if the Gene Stealer total is higher than the librarian total, nothing happens to them. If it's equal, they suffer just 1 mortal wound, so only 1 Gene Stealer killed. And if they roll lower than the librarian's total, then D3 mortal wounds are dealt to them. So he got 15, then 9 plus 5, 14, so that's lower than his, so D3 mortal wounds are dealt to them. 3 again, because a 5 or 6 is a 3, you round up. So that's 3 more Gene Stealers are slain. We have what's known as the shooting phase. So there's several different weapon types. There's grenades, which can't be fired within engagement range, which is 1 inch away from enemy model. Pistol weapons, which can be fired in close combat. There's rapid fire, which if the target is within half range of the person firing the rapid fire weapon, you get a roll double the hit rolls, so you can do more damage if you're within half range. And there's assault, which is the only kind of weapon that can be fired if you advance in the turn that you advanced, but it's -1 to hit. So for example, if they had assault weapons, then and they had advanced this turn, then their ballistic skills 3 up, so basically they'd be hitting on 4s instead of 3s. And there's melee weapons, which are basically, they can only be used in close combat. And finally, there's heavy weapons, where just if the unit moves at all on that turn, you're -1 to hit, because they're too cumbersome and just unwieldy in general. So we're going to start off with these assault marines. So 4 of them have things called bolt pistols. They're hitting on 3s because, like I said, they're not heavy or assault. So hitting on 3s, so that's only 1 hit. I'm going to spend a command point. That means I can reroll only 1 of these dice, so it's still 3s to hit, and I still miss. But it takes me down to 3 command points. How this works is, if the strength of the weapon is double the toughness of the target, you need a 2 or higher to wound. If the strength is just higher but it's not double, it's a 3 or higher. If the strength is the same as the toughness, it's a 4 or higher, so 50-50 chance. If the toughness of the target is higher than the strength of the weapon, it's a 5 or higher, and if the toughness of the target is double, you can only wound on a 6. So because it's strength 4 from the bolt pistols and the toughness of the Genestealers is 4, it's a 4 higher that's needed here, and I make it. So that means a 5 up armour save for the Genestealers, and they fail it. So that's another dead Genestealer. The Sergeant, the one with the red helmet, has a thing called a plasma pistol. This has 2 weapon types profile types, where you can either choose to do a standard shot or supercharged. Now, a supercharged is stronger and more damaging, but it comes with the risk of, if you roll a 1 for the hit roll, it does kill him. So, and obviously misses. So I'm just going to do a standard shot because they're only Genestealers. It hits on a 3, and it hits. It's strength 7 versus toughness 4, so that's a 3 or higher because its strength is high but not double, and it makes it. So it's a -3 AP, but the Genestealers have something called an invulnerable save, where what happens is you can choose to either use an armour save or an invulnerable save. And they have a 5 up armour save and a 5 up invulnerable save. So it's pretty pointless using AP weapons against them because, you know, they can just use the invulnerable save. So that means a 5 up invulnerable save, because if they didn't, then they'd be dead, because it would go, if it's AP -3, that would be the equivalent to an 8 up armour save, which on a 6-sided dice you can't have. So 5 up save, and that's another one dead. So out of that unit, only 2 Genestealers are left. Librarian is out of range, I checked off camera. Now, these Space Marines have rapid fire weapons, and they're going to target these termagants in the cover. But the thing is, even though they're outside of half range, they have a rule where if they are this unit type, which is known as intercessors, then as long as their unit hasn't moved this turn, they're allowed to fire rapid fire weapons as if they were within half range. So 4 of them have things called bolt rifles. They have rapid fire 1, so that basically means each bolt rifle gets 2 shots because they haven't moved. So, and there's 4 of them, so 4 times 2 means 8 shots. Hitting on 3s because that's their ballistic skill. Hitting on 3s. 3 hits. I'm going to command point one of these. No, just still 3 hits. It is strength 4 against toughness 3, so that means they're wounding on 3s because strength is higher than toughness. That's 2 wounds at -1, but because they have a 6 up armour save, so normally they wouldn't still be alive right now, but because they're in cover, that adds +1, so basically it's just a normal armour save because the effects of the AP and the cover just, they get rid of each other basically. So that's 2 saves at 6 up. And I make 1, so that means only 1 termagant has died. The sergeant of this squad over there, he has a thing called a Astartes grenade launcher. This is a grenade weapon type. It's D6, but it has a special rule called Blast, where what happens is if it's targeting a unit that has 10 or more members still alive within it, then you get the maximum number of shots. So because it's grenade D6, that basically means you get 6 shots. So, and because there's 17 members, because it was a unit of 18 and I've only killed one so far. So 6 shots, but you still need to roll a hit and wound. So hitting on 3s, that's 5 hits, and wounding on 4s, because it's only strength 3 instead of 4. I make 1 wound, and it's a 5 up armour save because it has no AP and they've got +1 due to being in cover. And they're fine. Okay, next we have this attack bike. It has a twin bolt gun here and a thing called a multi-melter there. Twin bolt gun. It's a rapid fire 2 weapon, but it's not within half range of this Biovore unit. So that means I only get 2 shots. So 2 shots hitting on 3s. So that's 2 hits. They are toughness 5, so it'll be 5s to wound because toughness is higher than strength but not double. So I make 1 of them. So that's 1 armour save at 4+, because they have a 4+ armour save and there's no AP. And don't make it. So that means 1 has a wound, and I'll need to check real quick how many wounds these guys have. They have 4 wounds each. I checked on a site called Warhammer, so this is down to 3 wounds, and I've put a little dice there as a reminder. So next we are going to fire the multi-melter. This is a heavy weapon, so because it's moved, it means it's -1 to hit. So it's ballistic skill 3 up, so that becomes a 4. So each 4 here is a hit, and it both misses. And I can't reroll either of these because, like I said, you can only spend 1 command point per phase. So now we have the captain on the outside of the building. He has something called a master crafted bolt gun. It's rapid fire 1, but it's not within half range. He's also going to fire at these Biovores. He hits because he hits on a 2 up instead of a 3 for his ballistic skill. It is strength 4, and it turns out they're actually toughness 4, not 5. So it's a 4 wound because strength is equal to toughness. And it's 1 save, and it's -1 AP, and they have a 4 armour save normally, so it becomes 5 up. And they make it anyway. Charge phase, where any of your units within 12 inches of an enemy unit are allowed to charge, which enters into something called close combat. So I'll show you how to do this now. Let's say those assault marines wanted to charge the 2 marine and gene stealers. I've measured it, they would need 7 inches to charge. So what you do is you get 2 dice and you roll them, and that's how many inches they make. So you need to roll equal or higher to the distance to be able to enter the fight phase. So let's roll. So let's say this is the only time we're allowed to re-roll both dice for 1 command point, and it's a fight phase, it's a charge phase. The charge phase and the fight phase are 2 separate phases. So so that's 11. So they are definitely within close combat. Normally there's a thing you can do called Overwatch, where if you are charged for 1 command point, the unit is allowed to fire any ranged weapons at the unit they're being charged by, but they only hit on a 6 because it's the equivalent of someone coming sprinting at them, so it's very hard to hit them. But the gene stealers don't have any ranged weapons, so they aren't allowed to Overwatch, so they just get charged. And how it works now is the unit that did the charge gets to fight first. So each assault marine except for the sergeant is equipped with something called a chainsword. These add 1 to the attack's characteristic when they make an attack with it. And space marines also have a rule called shock assault, where in a turn that they charge into close combat or were charged, they add 1 to their attack's characteristic for that turn. So basically what that means is each assault marine that isn't the sergeant has an attack's characteristic of 2. That increases to 3 because of shock assault, and then it goes to 4 because the chainsword gives them an extra attack. So there's 4 of them with chainswords, so that's 16 chainsword attacks. They have a weapon skill of 3+, so they need a 3 or higher to manage to land a hit. That's only so out of 16 attacks, all but 1 missed, so that's 15 hits. And then next we have, so now strength 4 against toughness 4, because the strength of a chainsword says user, so no, these are strength 4, the assault marines are strength 4, so it's a strength 4 attack. So strength 4 against toughness 4, that means a 4 or higher is needed here to do wounds to these gene stealers. So that's that's 7. So that's 7 wounds have been dealt. So it's AP -1, but as I mentioned earlier, the gene stealers have an invulnerable save of 5+. So this is 7 5+ invulnerable saves are made now, and they make not a single one. So that basically just means they get chainsworded to death, and they, like as I've just said, there is none of them left alive. So the last 2 are dead. Now what happens is, if you kill every member of a unit that you charged during close combat, you are allowed to do something called consolidate, where basically you can move 3 inches more up towards the nearest and closest enemy unit. So in this case that will be the Warlords, so I'm going to consolidate towards the Warlord. Now that that's over, that was the only fight going on. You have a thing called the morale phase once the fight phase is over, where what happens is you determine, basically it determines if any of them get too scared and run away. Let's say there was those 2 gene stealers still there. So there was 8 of their friends got killed in front of them, and they have a leadership of 9. So how you determine whether they run away is you determine the number of models in the unit that were killed in the turn, and then you roll a dice and add them together. So let's say it's 9. So let's say 8 were killed. So that's a 12. So if the total is higher than your leadership, that means 1 runs away. So one of those gene stealers would have ran away. And then after that, what you do is you roll a dice for each member of the unit that's left after that, and then for each 1 or 2, that's another one that runs away. So the last one would have stayed because that's a 5. That's how you play 1 turn. Let's say that fight with the assault marines went on for quite a while, and the gene stealers just miraculously didn't die. Then what would happen is, how it works is, with the attacks back, is when it's your opponent's fight phase, you're allowed to choose 1 unit from your army that's in close combat, and they get to fight first, but you only choose that 1 unit. And as I said, when it starts, the unit that charged into close combat is the one that gets to go first. That's basically all that there is to how you play a simple game of 40k. Obviously this, like I said, is just a combat patrol game, but this is how the game mechanics generally work. So I hope you enjoyed this first episode of Wargaming and Warlords, and if you did, of course, subscribe to Matthew's channel, because he does a lot of good stuff. Well, actually it's not Matthew's channel, it's both our channels now. There's quite a few channels involved. But anyway, so yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and that's Big Dan signing out.